what I'd like to direct us to when thinking about the advancement of human rights, and in particular, the rights of religious minorities in nations, is a kind of a critical lens, a tool that we can use both as an analytic tool so that we can help to track populations at risk, as well as an important political advocacy tool for inclusion in essence, the question of what constitutes the nation. National identity is such an intensely debated, contested, and unfortunately a source of conflict in so many places around the world that when thinking of protecting human rights, we have a tendency to focus on the importance of international legal instruments, international actors that might intervene to protect populations at risk. The United Nations speaking of concepts of the responsibility to protect, but ultimately the protection of the rights of religious communities. They are best protected when they're protected internally within the states and the communities where they live, where they exist, where they thrive. The key to this is their inclusion in the national identity. Now, national identity is something that is constantly changing. It's constantly evolving and sometimes devolving and absolutely contested. Political actors will fight to protect their identity, both their internal sense of their identity and the external sense of their identity. And it's an important element of what we call security. I'm an international relations scholar, so we focus a great deal on issues of security. By the way, we call this concept ontological security, the willingness to fight for you, to defend yourself, your identity within a community. Now, Brianna has mentioned many times about the importance of history. That's my research, because I think your history, a nation's history, your individual history are such an important element of your identity, how you remember your past. It might be things you have experienced. It might be things your family has experienced, your community has experienced, the groups of which you consider yourself to be a part of have experienced. And though history exists in the past, or history is about the past, excuse me, it exists in the present. And our contestations over the nature of history and whether or not those narratives include religious minorities is essential. This is historical memory. The filtering of history for contemporary political, social, economic interests. So, for example, a community of a religious minority community that has been battling this issue for so many years would be the Tamil Hindu in Sri Lanka. For years, they had been described in Sri Lankan history books as an entity brought to Sri Lanka by a colonial entity, Great Britain, to work the tea plantations. And in fact, the census would frequently refer to plantation Tamils. They were not a part of the political community in Sri Lanka. There was not a political space for their representation. And so a nation that is majority Buddhist, as well as majority Sinhalese, had seen the Tamils, many of them had seen the Tamils as a kind of foreign entity. And so we could certainly advocate that this is a community that has the right to protect, to practice, their religious practices. But a far more effective tool would be to build a narrative where Tamils are a part of Sri Lanka. And in fact, historically, they have been for centuries, predating the British experience, the British colonial presence on Sri Lanka. There was a Tamil presence in Jaffna, in the peninsula, in the north, dating back at least to the 14th and 15th centuries. And so anthropologists and historians, including this narrative, is absolutely essential. I will finish with this. This is not to say that the legal approach to protecting human rights isn't essential, but I want to urge all of us to look at the narratives, the historical narratives that nations present, and urge an inclusive narrative that celebrates diversity, that celebrates religious minority communities and finds strength in those communities. And this is an ongoing debate, not just in places like Sri Lanka, but right here in the United States.